Hello and welcome to. I'm actually sitting in the Mercury office right now. I'm Ryan Black, the sports editor of the paper. I'm also the Kansas State beat writer, and I'm joined via Zoom with Greg Woods. And Greg, I guess it's the first time that we've really connected on anything since the crazy night there at the Sprint Center. It's been more than a month. Is it hard to believe it's been that long ago already?
Feels like 6 months, man. I can't believe that long ago, man. That was crazy.
Well, and we were certainly on maybe not the ground floor. I mean, that would have been OKC and all the stuff going on there with the Jazz and Rudy Gobert and all that. But everything about that night, Greg, was just so surreal, in terms of pretty much it seems like everyone knew this was going to be the last game between any Big 12 teams the whole year. And potentially we didn't even know at that point about the NCAA tournament. That day they'd announced that the tournaments would be played without fans. But then, thankfully, before we left for the next day's game, which would have been against Baylor, they went ahead and canceled the tournament. And so I'm just glad that we didn't drive over there for no reason. I mean, I feel bad for the fans who maybe had that happen to them, but you understand that just in the interest of public safety and things like that, that's why they did it.
Yeah, man. Well, before we get off that night, that I will always remember that night. I mean, for a lot of reasons, but I think one, because it seemed like every 5-10 minutes there was some news, like something else canceled, getting postponed, the tournament getting played without fans, this and that. And it was just like, at that point, it was more exciting than scary because you were like,
Tom Hanks' wife tested positive that night.
Yeah, that's right. It was more just like, oh my gosh, it felt too far away, even though all these things were getting canceled. It felt still kind of like a distant kind of threat because we didn't know the mortality rates and how quickly it was going to affect U.S. things. Obviously now a lot has changed, but I think of that night, it was just like, holy cow, man, this might be a bigger deal than we thought at first.
Well, that's for sure. And Greg, it ended, not only Kansas State's season, but everybody else, across the country, specifically for K-State, they did end on a 2-game winning streak. They won their final regular season game and then beat TCU in the first round tournament game. And since then, man, talk about do what?
I said they ended on a win.
Yeah, no, 2 wins. Like it's a back-to-back wins, remember, because they won on Sunday night as well to end a 10-game losing streak. But speaking of that, it's just like, man, there's been a lot of news with K-State since the end of the season. I mean, 5 players transfer, Greg. Cartier Jada, James Love, Nigel Shad, David Sloan, and then most recently Levi Stockard. And I guess, Greg, because I'm curious for you, how would you rank them least surprising to most surprising or vice versa? And I think we were both going to agree at least on those 2, but I'm interested to see kind of your middle 3 where you'd rank those.
Okay, so I'll go from my most surprising down to my least surprising.
Okay.
Most surprising, I would say, with David Sloan. One, because he seemed in line for a lot more playing time next year. He never really played bad or played poorly last season.
Well, he would have started next year. I don't think there's any doubt. I think it was going to be him and Nigel Pack.
Totally.
The starting lineup.
Totally agree. So that would be my number 1 as far as most surprising. Number 2, I would say Levi Stockard. For one of the same reasons. One, he would have been in line for a lot more playing time just with all these newcomers coming in anyway. He was improving, I think. I think he was kind of finding his groove as far as his kind of back to the basket game. So he was number 2 in my book. 3, I think 3 and 4 are kind of interchangeable for me with Nigel Shad and Nigel Shad and James Love, both of whom had trouble getting off the bench. One, because James Love was injured and he was suspended, and Nigel Shad had injuries and he was just not getting on the court. And, of course, the least surprising is Cartier Jada. You kind of saw the writing on the wall. Even Bruce Weber, when we hopped on Zoom with him last week, was like, I think most people expected that. So, that would be my least surprising for sure. That was the easiest pick for me.
Well, and like you said, Greg, we definitely agree. Most surprising, David Sloan, because, again, I think he just was certainly in line to start next year because, he would have been the most experienced returning guard, outside of Mike McGurl. But I think, that they would have gone with some kind of 3-guard lineup with him. And I already mentioned Nigel Pack, the kind of their highest ranked incoming signee, especially at guard. And then least surprising, Cardi. I just think that we'd known that for months. I just think that and it's not surprising where he ended up either, right? Virginia Tech, I think a lot of people kind of immediately connected the dots with Chester Frazier, former K-State assistant, joining him there in Blacksburg. But I'll actually – this is where I think I'll surprise you. I actually think the second most surprising transfer to me was Nigel Shadd.
Really?
If only because every time Bruce would bring him up, Bruce Weber, the head coach, he would bring him up. It would be that it's like, hey, I mean, he's got some actual physical ability. He just can't stay healthy. And so I really think they liked him, especially I think they liked his body and at least what he presented. And I just think that if he could have ever stayed healthy, he would at least. I'm not saying he would have ever started, but I think they would have had him like the first reserve off the bench, or at least in that kind of role. I think I just kind of felt like with Levi Stockard that he maybe kind of saw that, well, what they're going to do is maybe put Antonio Gordon and Monte in the starting lineup, and now I'm going to be a senior coming off the bench. And I just got the sense that maybe he didn't want to do that. And then James Love, I just think between his injuries and then him kind of now always being connected with the brawl at KU, that's why I'd put him the least surprising outside of Cardi. Like I said, I just don't want people to take that to mean that I'm saying that that Nigel Shadd would have had a dominant season or anything. I just think that unlike, again, James Love, it just seemed like every time Bruce would bring up Nigel Shadd, he always had very complimentary things to say about him. And it was always just like, well, if he had not been hurt, he would have at least been somewhat of a rotation piece instead of just the mop-up guy getting in with 5 minutes to play in a blowout kind of deal. But, Greg, I guess from there, now with Levi Stockard, so what's crazy, right, is they get Carlton Lingard to commit, and then, wow, they're finally back to 13 scholarship players. Then the next morning, Levi Stockard announced he's transferring, and now they're back to 12. So, in your opinion, what do you think they should do with that 13th spot? Should they go after someone now, or do you think they should save it for another recruiting class?
I mean, I would definitely look and see what's available, because at this point you're bringing in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. If you count Casey Iziagu, I hope I'm saying that right. Casey
Iziagu, yeah.
Right. That's 8. If you count him, 8 newcomers, which even though 2 of them are from the JUCO ranks, that's still a lot of inexperience out there. Of course, if you bring someone else in, that's even more inexperience, but I think it's also another body. So I think you have to find a balance between, like, is this somebody who is more than just another player on the team and someone who we feel like can contribute right away. But I think you can go both ways. I think you can say, okay, we've had these guys for a while. They can contribute. If not all of them, at least some of them, we are familiar with them enough to know whether or not they're going to crack the rotation or not. So I guess I guess it might be more of a preference thing for Bruce Weber and company, but we'll see.
Well, what would you go after if you were the coaching staff?
What would I go after? Well, I mean, let's take a look at. They have a lot of guards in this class with Luke Kasubke. I think I'm saying that wrong.
I think at least from what I've seen on the pronunciation charts, Kasubke.
Kasubke. Okay. Well, I'm glad I asked.
St. Louis guy. The pipeline there continues. As Davian Bradford, also St. Louis.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then Marcel Miguel, also a guard from West Oaks Academy. He was injured, but they do have another guard in him, Nigel Pack. And then finally with Rudy Williams from Northeast Oklahoma A&M College. It's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is.
But they have a lot of guards. I think if they can find a forward who can provide some stretch capabilities, that would be ideal for them. I think Bruce Weber on that Zoom call that I mentioned earlier said that while Siri Williams has improved as a shooter, his strengths are more in just his athleticism with running and jumping. It's kind of being in this kind of energy guy that can run and jump for you, that can kind of be everywhere at once. So I think if they can find a forward who has a reliable jump shot from the perimeter, that would be ideal. One, because shooting is a hot commodity nowadays, obviously, but also if you can just get someone to kind of reinforce that forward position, that would be better.
Well, I'm going to say something very specific, Greg. I think not only should they go after a big man who's a forward, but I think it needs to be a grad transfer and someone who's a senior, because right now, as it stands, Mike McGurl is the one senior on the entire roster. And I know it's not ideal to bring in a guy who's only going to be one and done, but at least that's someone who's experienced. And it would mean it's somebody who's played elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't profess to know off the top of my head who's on the market, so to speak, but I'm just saying that if I was put in charge of filling the final spot for K-State, I would go try to find a grad transfer forward. Like I said, because, otherwise, man, you got a lot of really young guys, out there in the post. Like I said, they will do some stretch stuff. Antonio Gordon seemed to like to shoot 3 whenever he had a chance to do it. But, outside of that, there's just yes, exactly, with the kiss. There's just they're very inexperienced when it comes to the forwards, and that's why I just think that if you're gonna fill this spot in this class, I think why not go after. If it's not a grad transfer, then it needs to be, a JUCO guy. I think would be the second preference if there's someone out there that maybe they think they could go after. Greg, what did you think? Because they missed out on him, but the Donovan Williams thing. Did you see some of the quotes that he had about the Oklahoma State commitment?
I don't think I did. What did he say?
Well, it was a story by Kellis Robinette who talked to him, and he literally called it a business decision, and that it's a business, and that K-State's coaching staff should understand that. I think what surprised me about that is that, we kind of constantly hear about major college football and college basketball being a big business, but you don't usually hear the players out and out say that. Right. So were you expecting him to be part of this class? Did it surprise you when you saw that he ended up going with Oklahoma State?
Well, it didn't surprise me because up until the day before when JT Thor committed to Auburn, I think up until then, Donovan Williams seemed like a pretty, solid K-State lean. And then as soon as JT Thor, who was also considering Oklahoma State, committed to Auburn, that kind of paved the way for Donovan Williams to commit to Oklahoma State. And that's kind of when that felt certain to me. So, yeah, big loss for K-State. Obviously, the guy was very talented, big scoring punch, which K-State would have appreciated if you watched the way they played last year and just in general. I mean, the guy's a great player. So yeah, that hurts. But I think they have a lot of guys that, even though that jump from JUCO high school, obviously, to the Big 12 is such a huge gap. I think there's a few guys in there that got to soften that blow next season. So.
Well, Greg, no, there's going to be a lot of new pieces K-State's going to have to work in. It's going to be really interesting to see how Bruce Weber and the coaching staff handles this. And, if nothing else, their previous recruiting classes past year got some experience in some big-time games. So I think, at least in that regard, that will help. But it might end up being another long season for them next year. We'll just have to see what happens there. And we'll also just, Greg, see if the season even starts on time. With all this pandemic stuff, who knows whether anything's going to start on time later this year. So. Well, folks, thank you so much for joining, Greg and I on this Zoom call, and like I said, we'll talk again sometime soon. Thank you.